In the early 1800s, New Orleans landowners and socialites depended heavily on slave labor. Both male and female slaves were used for strenuous duties in the cotton fields, as well as more refined duties as domestic servants in the homes of the city's upper class. Despite all the hardships suffered by slaves in the early 1800s, none can compare to what happened in this building on Royal Street in the city's French Quarter. The structure was once the scene of despicable horrors performed by a prominent member of the city's social elite. In 1834, the Royal Street home belonged to Madame Delphine Lalaurie. A sophisticated society belle, Madame Lalaurie was known throughout the city for her lavish entertainments and grand balls. Madame Lalaurie was married to a physician, Dr. Leonard Louis Nicholas Lalaurie, also a highly respected member of the community. Together, they lived the luxurious lifestyle of Southern aristocrats. But the public demeanor of this couple was a hideous charade. Lurking behind the charming smiles were the souls of sadists, a fact that came to light on April 10, 1834. A fire broke out in the kitchen of the mansion and quickly spread throughout the structure. When firemen arrived, they found a strange barred door leading to the attic. When they forced the door open to check for smoldering embers, the firemen smelled the unmistakable odor of death and witnessed a sight sickening beyond belief. The New Orleans Bee newspaper described what the firemen witnessed in its April 11, 1834 edition.
Upon entering, the most appalling spectacle met their eyes. 7 slaves, more or less horribly mutilated, were seen suspended by the neck, with their limbs apparently stretched and torn from one extremity to the other. Language is powerless and inadequate to give a proper conception of the horror which a scene like this must have inspired. We shall not attempt it, but leave it to the reader's imagination to picture what it was. Reporter, New Orleans Bee.
I would imagine the best way to describe it would be Frankenstein experiments, where limbs had been broken and reset in strange angles, amputations, skin grafting, just really bizarre kinds of medical experiments.
Word of the atrocities quickly spread. The savagery of Madame Lalaurie and her physician husband was simply too much for the community to bear.
The people who lived here were aghast that something of this nature would happen. A lynch party evolved, and she and her husband escaped by the skin of their teeth, so to speak, being pursued by a mob who was ready to hang them for their transgressions.
Madame Lalaurie and her husband were never seen again. Some believe they moved to northern Louisiana. Others heard that the couple immigrated to France. The Lalaurie mansion went through a series of new owners. In the late 1800s, during renovation of the house, workmen tearing up floorboards apparently found several human skeletons, the remains of other slaves whose demise had been hidden from the public for years. Many of the mansion's new owners and their employees reported frightening incidents they could only associate with the spirits of the Madame herself and the slaves that she and her husband brutalized. On some occasions, the sightings of Madame Lalaurie have been relatively benign, such as the time she was spotted simply leaning over the crib of an infant. But at other times, Madame's darker side returned. In the late 19th century, a sleeping servant found himself literally being strangled by the ghost of Madame Lalaurie.
He awoke to see what appeared to be a sort of translucent white female with black hair, very pale features, very attractive, but with a very maniacal look on her face, choking him. He's preserved by a pair of black hands who break her grip from around his throat. And the specter then screams and disappears. So this is evidently she and her slaves are still having at each other.
Spirits of the slaves themselves have also been spotted, but unlike the spirit of Madame Lalaurie, they have never done harm. In the 1890s, when the Lalaurie home had been converted to a boarding house, a fruit peddler climbed the stairs to make a startling discovery.
This individual came back to his lodgings after a day's work, mounted the steps to go to his room, and he finds on the steps a black male who was naked with the exception of being chained, being shackled. The man immediately approached this fella to demand to know what he was doing, and he lunged towards this figure, and when he did, the figure just simply disappeared.
Today, the Lalaurie building is home to a trendy French Quarter restaurant. But to the students of New Orleans' haunted history, it stands as a reminder of Madame Lalaurie's shameful past.
I imagine if she hasn't found peace, she probably could still be haunting the old house and roaming looking for blood and satisfaction.